The CDC was an absolute barn fire mess. And, there's one fight I had with them where, and again, I backed off quickly because I'm saying, okay, how's this going to look on the front page of the New York Times? And I'm screaming at the head of the CDC. But they basically were saying this 14 days rule. And I said, okay, they're telling our people they have to quarantine for 14 days. And so I said to my Bill, where does that come from? So we have a study. So I said, bring me the study. So that night, again, I was on like 2 hours of sleep, but I read through the study. And I'm seeing that it's like a study of 182 people, of which they know when 140 of them got the disease. The average time from contracting the disease to showing symptoms was 5.1 days. And because the sample size was so small, they used 2 standard deviations and told the whole world they had to spend 14 days in quarantine.
Wow.
In order to do it. I'm saying, wait, so we're screwing up the entire global economy off the sample size of 140 people.
Of course. So let's talk a little bit about the COVID situation and then sort of how policy worked around that, because one of the things that kind of blew me away the entire time was that the same people who every day were calling Donald Trump Hitler and all the worst things in the world, he's a dictator, blah, 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 they were the same people who wanted him to have all the federal power to do whatever he wanted, because very early on he was like, let's leave it to the states and let them figure it out. You talk a little bit about some of the tensions with Fauci and all that. Mm-hmm. How crazy was that to advise him in this sort of unknown moment?
Yeah, so that was by far one of the scariest moments you could ever have, right? And again, this was after 3 years. And by the way, hypocrisy, I figured out, is not like a new thing. And why after like day 3? It didn't take me after 3 years,
Right.
But that was by far the scariest. We had things really moving. We were, again, economy was roaring. We had great people in place. We had plans. We were building for second term. And then COVID comes out of nowhere and really hit the world like a ton of bricks. And I write about in the book my experience getting pulled in, again, not as a medical expert, but just as somebody to help operationally who knew how to move the levers of government. Vice President Pence, who I worked very closely with, asked me to come on and help him execute with certain things like scale testing and whatnot. But it was very interesting. So you're making a lot of decisions. The media was the first thing they got Trump on, right? Because if he was more careful, then he was killing jobs. If he was opening the economy, he was killing people. Yeah. And so CNN kept those tickers up, depending on the day. And they were loving the fact that they can just bludgeon him. And you could always find a nurse who's afraid they're going to run out of stuff. And we were playing whack-a-mole. I mean, I had stories, that I write about where I'd see a nurse on CNN complaining they don't have masks in a hospital. I'd get on the phone with the head of the hospital and say, what do you need? Okay, we'll get it to you. And we made sure all of these shortages that everyone was fearing were going to happen did not happen. A lot of it is because we thought like business people, not like bureaucrats, right? So I tell stories about how, we find all these masks, we figure out how to do DPAs, and to get them, in order to get them over, we don't have enough planes as US. So I call Fred Smith, I call David Abney from UPS and FedEx, and I said, look, we need your planes. And they're like, they're your Air Force, take them, like anything you do. And even David Abney told me months later, I've never seen anything like it in my career. As quickly as I could land planes in Asia, you had them filled with masks and sent back. We were under a week away from running out of supplies in this country. And again, Trump thought out of the box. He empowered business people to do it and got a lot of things done. And ultimately, the biggest testament to that was Operation Warp Speed, right? So even Fauci said, Trump is, over exaggerating. It's going to be at least a year and a half till we get a working vaccine. And so we got the bureaucracy out of the way. We brought in the private sector, brought in the military. Each thing, and this is one of the things I think readers have really liked about the book so far, is that I'm pretty honest about mistakes that I made and things that I could have done better. But I show from all these things how I learned from these experiences that enabled us. So like the lessons we learned on scaling testing was that I always say to solve a problem, there's 3 things you need, right? You need imagination, you need money, and you need gravity. Right? If those 3 are basically the catch-alls of the categories you need. For testing, we had, I think, a really good plan. So the imagination check. You're the federal government, you print money, so we had endless cash. That wasn't our issue.
Right.
But we just couldn't produce Q-tips, right? Basically swabs for people. Like, we're about to launch 400 sites, and they come to us and say, sorry, we only have 1.2 million swabs in the country. So I'm like, man. And I started learning that like the lowest cost item was going to become our biggest bottleneck. Mm-hmm. And that was just a gravity issue. So we worked that through, and it was actually one of our issues with Fauci, because he goes on television and he says, on testing, we're just not there yet. Instead of saying like, dude, you were in charge of infectious diseases. You didn't tell us that we didn't have enough supplies in case one came. Then you're sitting in the task force every day. You've given us no additional ideas for how to do this better. if you're on TV, explain. We have a plan. We're doing this as fast as we can. We're going fast and everywhere else. Instead, I was like, are you a sportscaster or are you a member of the task force?
So what do you make of him, or what did you make of him then, and is that different than now?
I'll get to this, but just to finish what I was saying is that ultimately those lessons we learned from that for Warp Speed, which is how we did everything right early, and that enabled us to be successful and ramp up the manufacturing simultaneously. And I give some lessons on that. With him, I think that to make it for, first of all, nobody should be in a job for 50 years, especially not in a government job. I think he was an excellent politician in terms of his ability to be a survivor, but I think he also embraced a lot of the people would always build these people up as a counter to Trump. Like take a guy like Michael Avenatti, who is now I think in prison. Right. The media made him a hero because
he was going to be president
because he was against Trump, right? Yeah. So the media would create these like false heroes, and I think with Fauci, they elevated him like they elevated 20 people before, and I think he embraced it, and I think he liked it, and I think that led to a lot of. It wasn't about service, and it led to a lot of misinformation and confusion that didn't have to be the case. And so, again, like I give one great scene where Trump is fighting with him, saying, "Doc, I'm not going to keep the country closed. Like I'm not going to oversee the funeral of the greatest country and economy in the history of the world." And he meekly goes back and says, "Look, I'm just here to give medical advice. I'm just a doctor. You're the president. Your job is to account for all the other factors." And he backed off pretty quickly there. And so, again, interesting guy to work with. He was very pleasant. We had a good working relationship together, but very politically calculating and savvy, and wasn't always on our team.
Did you feel that from the agencies in general, that the CDC or the NIH or whoever else you were working with, that generally they weren't going to be staffed with Trump people, so that there was an odd incentive structure, right? They needed, they knew an election was coming.
Yes and no. Look, so Dr. Collins at NIH, I thought was very professional, very knowledgeable, always doing well. We had a couple of tensions with him about getting EUAs because they were trying to preserve perfect science. What we're saying, like convalescent plasma was an issue where we got killed in the paper because we were pushing to say this is something that's been around for 100 years. We have a study that's showing that it's working. Get it out there. Let doctors make the decision if they want it or not. But they're saying the study, which was done by the Mayo Clinic, I think, or Cleveland Clinic, wasn't done in pristine time. So look, this is wartime. Like if it's looking good, let people make their decisions. It's not going to kill people. And that was where we had some fights with the scientists. The CDC was an absolute barn fire mess. And there's one fight I had with them where, and again, I backed off quickly because I'm saying, okay, how's this going to look on the front page of the New York Times? And I'm screaming at the head of the CDC. But they basically were saying this 14 days rule. And I said, okay, they're telling our people they have to quarantine for 14 days. And so I said to my Bill, where does that come from? So we have a study. So I said, bring me the study. So that night, again, I was on like 2 hours of sleep, but I read through the study. And I'm seeing that it's like a study of 182 people, of which they know when 140 of them got the disease. The average time from contracting the disease to showing symptoms was 5.1 days. And because the sample size was so small, they used 2 standard deviations and told the whole world they had to spend 14 days in quarantine in order to do it. I'm saying, wait, so we're screwing up the entire global economy off a sample size of 140 people, right? It's like, so my point is like a lot of the things they were saying in the name of science were not scientific. And we tried to be nimble, and at first we trusted all these people because what the hell do we know? These were the experts on infectious diseases. But I think over time we became more convinced that we had to be pragmatic about these things and take their guidance and their perspective, but weigh it accordingly, knowing that they were a lot of academics who weren't very operational. At least somebody like Dr. Birx was actually quite helpful because she'd been on the front lines in a lot of these different countries in Africa. So when it came to problems, she knew operationally how to solve them. And again, I thought she was a very useful voice. I learned a lot from her. But it was very complicated time to be in. An amazing experience. And again, I do think the work that President Trump did saved a ton of lives. And I think if you would have had a normal politician there instead of an outsider and somebody who had a results mentality, the outcomes would have been significantly different.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about politics instead of nonstop yelling, check out our politics playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, watch our full episode playlist all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.